There's been three periods in my life when there's been a surge in record buying or music buying. And the first one started around 1975. The second one is in the 1990s when I dived deep into jazz and then Americana. Uh, Much of it on CD, but lots of jazz on vinyl. And then in the early 2000s, when we had children and we stopped going out in the evening for nights out, so I ended up so bored I had to buy records instead. But I'm here today. I'm going to talk about 1975, which was a kind of the pivotal year for me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, as I've done in the previous videos in the series, of what I think are the top 20 albums of the year. Some of which are agreed by the critics, and others are kind of personal as well. But it was a pivotal year for me because I left school. I left school at 16 and got my first job. The school was kind of a bit of a disaster, really. Halfway through my high school education, I had to switch schools as the system changed. And the last couple of years were characterized by my laziness, my lack of concentration, and my pleasure seeking, I guess. Spent most of my time doing the art that I enjoyed and was good at, and sports, playing football and cricket and running and so on and so forth. But I wasn't very academic, although I was half decent in English language. So I left school, no ambition, didn't even know what ambition was. Got my first job as a petrol pump attendant, which lasted for about 6 weeks before I was fired, because the guy I was working with was stealing stuff, and so he fired us both because he couldn't decide who was the bad guy. But it was possibly the luckiest break in my life, is because the day after I had a meeting with a careers officer who sent me for an interview to be an office junior, so an administration role in the local transport company that ran the metro system and all of the bus network in the Tyne and Wear area. And I spent 5 years there, and I was rubbing shoulders with people who'd already got good qualifications, and they always seemed to get promotions ahead of me, perhaps simply because of those qualifications. And it was kind of like a big realization, a wake-up call for me. And it was almost like, I've described it in the past as like someone fired a starting pistol and I started running, and I've not stopped running since. So I just pursue as much learning as I possibly can in all different areas over the years. And even though I'm retired now, I'm still super curious and still spend far too much time watching 3-hour-long videos, interviews, 3-hour-long interviews of videos between intellectuals, because it's kind of thing that floats my boat when I'm not buying records. But anyway, that's my preamble. It was a big, big year for me. And the music scene at the time, certainly in the UK, was in a bit of a transitional period. So the 60s had gone, the Beatles had gone, the Rolling Stones still active, but there's a lot more competition from other hard rock bands, and prog music in the early 70s, where many of the classics, most of the classics of the genre were released. And 1975 is that we're in this kind of gap between the that really inventive period in the early 1970s to where we were getting the best we were getting almost was the Electric Light Orchestra in the charts. And there's a lot of pop of many different genres, different styles getting into the charts. And it was a couple of years, yeah, 2 years before punk hit the scene, and then there was that punk and new wave revolution, which transformed popular music for maybe the next possibly even 10 years. But more of that on a later date. But these are the albums that out of 1975 that I think are the top 20. And I'm going to start with somebody who was very prominent in the early 60s, or throughout the 60s, but not a big person on the scene here in the UK, and that was Joan Baez, and the album from 1975, Diamonds and Rust. Now, this album is kind of different from her previous earlier stuff on Vanguard. There's got some albums, early Joan Baez albums, where she covers Dylan all the time and does other protest songs. This is much more of a singer-songwriter, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, early mid-70s feel, kind of mid-paced rhythms with some ballads, kind of all fairly sedate and predictable instrumentation, guitar, bass, drums, maybe a fiddle or something like that. But this is a nice feel. It's a bit of a mixed album. She her ballads, the singing on the ballads, including the title track, is absolutely fantastic. But there are some missteps in here as far as I'm concerned. She does a version of Jackson Browne's Fountain of Sorrow, but her vocals are too stiff. It's too staid in my judgment, although it's an absolute brilliant song. But Jackson Browne had that kind of nice, easy way with his vocals. This one seems a little bit too rigid in its style. She does a version of Simple Twist of Fate by Dylan. Kind of almost a little bit of a comedy number. She had to get a Dylan track on the album, I'm sure. She does also she's got a song called Dida, which is just the word Dida repeated ad nauseum. But what's interesting about it is that Joni Mitchell sings on it as well, and that's really, really good. So yeah, it's a good album. It has its flaws, like a lot of these, but that is my number 20 of 1975. My number 19, changing genres, is That's the Way of the World by Earth, Wind and Fire. Possibly my favorite Earth, Wind and Fire album. It's standard for the period. It's got fantastic ballads, wonderful harmony vocals, very dynamic and varied sound, because they still do on this album, like many of the others, they do those short musical interludes which come out of nowhere and have got very different styles. But it's just a great album. It's got a lovely feel to it. As I say, the ballads are great, and of course it's got Reasons on, which is a great classic as well. So that's number 19, Earth, Wind and Fire. Number 18 is another from the singer-songwriter genre, and that is Janis Ian, Between the Lines. This is not really like Joan Baez. This has this feel of melancholy and quiet, maybe kind of, classic bedsitter music. The instrumentation is mostly acoustic, bit of cello, bit of piano, acoustic guitar, light rhythms, barely present rhythms from the rhythm section, as it were. But this has got the classic At 17 on it, and it's got this track on side 2. I mean, it's just beautiful all the way through, but Tea and Sympathy on side 2 is fantastic. And I remember picking that up. This is what compilations used to be like back in the day, and I bought this Old Grey Whistle Test, and viewers in the UK will know that Old Grey Whistle Test was a kind of a rock music TV program, late night program, and they released this compilation under the banner of Old Grey Whistle Test, and it had bands from Britain and then those from the USA and artists from the USA. And this is where I discovered Jackson Browne. He does on this one. You've got For a Dancer. Where have we? Yeah, For a Dancer, and then Tea and Sympathy's on here as well. And you've also got the Eagles, Nils Lofgren, Gil Scott Heron, Little Feat, Hendrix, Bonnie Raitt, and so on. So yeah, great albums, compilation. I still put that on once in a while today. But yeah, that's how I discovered Janis Ian. So yeah, that's number 17, Janis Ian, Between the Lines. Number 16 is Neil Young's Tonight's the Night. Now, I talked about Harvest in a previous video, and I always found the Harvest album, with the London Symphony Orchestra playing bits. It seemed a bit uneven to me. I think the song quality was great, but it was almost a bit like a various artist album. It was just the styles were really quite different. But this is of a mood, presents a mood. This is kind of a very late night. It was written and performed under tragic circumstances because I think there's a Danny Whitten who overdosed one of his band members. Nils Lofgren appears on here. But this is very coherent. It's a bit ramshackled. It's got a few little up-tempo bits in it, but it kind of has that I'm not going to call it a softer feel. It is definitely ramshackled, but it's as I say, it's one of a piece. It's the whole thing flows really, really great, and I just happen to listen to it always at nighttime, just the way it is. Anyway, that's Tonight's the Night. So that is, let me see if I can get the numbers right here. Number 17, number 16. Yeah, boom. Dr. Feelgood, Down by the Jetty. What an album. So direct. Just really leaps out the speaker. It's got a really big, thick, punchy sound. It's in mono. Great band. Pub rock was the genre they were associated with. They kind of continued to the punk era, but they definitely weren't punk. Dominated by Wilko Johnson, who died just a few years ago after his pancreatic cancer, I think, returned. Could be wrong on the details about that one, but he suffered from pancreatic cancer and was on the way out until a surgeon in America did an operation on him and performed a miracle in keeping him alive and touring almost to the end. But Wilko was noted for this guitar style that was kind of lead and rhythm at the same time, and it was a very unique sound. But he was always keen to acknowledge that he'd stolen the style from somebody else who was around in the 1960s. I can't remember who it was now. Somebody will tell me or tell us. But yeah, he really dominated the songwriting as well. And you've got here Roxette, She Does It Right, All Through the City, all bona fide classics. Great, great album. From the very direct to the fair and acoustic and laid back mellowness of Barclay James Harvest and Time Honored Ghosts. I think I bought this one from a record club, but I had to buy an album every year. This is dominated by mellotron, acoustic, and electric guitars. The vocals are, as I say, they're very, very soft in places. There are no real standout tracks on this album, but it has got this mood about it that meant a lot to me at the time, and I still dig it out today, even though none of the songs really, as I say, really stand out. They do put their Beatles connections or their love of the Beatles music in full-on display here in a track called Titles, which is the third track on side one, where every word in the song is made up of titles of Beatles songs, which you either think that's a really good idea or cheesy as hell and absolutely rubbish. But anyway, it's a good album, and I still enjoy it today. Right, I'm just checking on my numbers here. That was number 15. Number 14 is the critics' favorite, Patti Smith and Horses. Possibly not my favorite Patti Smith album, but it's undeniable that it is a trailblazer of an album. Kind of a punk sensibility, of course, of Patti Smith, but with that poetry that is kind of dominant. This is known probably mainly for two main tracks, I think, and that is her and their version of Gloria, which is great, and of course Land, the long track on side 2, and closing off with Elegy at the end, which is kind of not punky at all, but definitely that poetry thing. As I say, it's not possibly my favorite Patti Smith album, but it's up there. Great, great album. Right, number 13, singer-songwriter again. You've seen this guy before, haven't you? Paul Simon there, and this is still crazy after all these years. He's a bit of a veteran by this time. He'd been around since the early mid-60s. This is extremely polished. Really great album. All the classic stuff you'd expect from Paul Simon. Intelligent lyrics, nice singing, distinctive but not harsh. Rhythms that are varied and interesting. He's picking up influences already, as he did on There Goes Ryman Simon, but this is right up there as well. Favorite tracks, of course, is the 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Title track is amazing. My Little Town, Art Garfunkel sings on as well, I recall. But I love Have a Good Time. I'm having a good time. I Do It for Your Love. Some of the folks' lives roll easy. Great album. So that is number 13. Number 12, in my judgment, the 12th best album of 1975 is Deep Purple and Come Taste the Band. Ritchie Blackmore had gone after Stormbringer. Their sound changed radically. Ian Gillan had already gone earlier before Burn and then Stormbringer, because we had David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes on vocals and vocals bass, respectively, bringing kind of blues and soul to the sound, and this really swings this album. The first, it's beautifully recorded, sounds absolutely fantastic. The first three tracks, Coming Home, Lady Luck and Getting Tighter, fantastic. And the last two tracks, This Time Around and Ode to G and You Keep On Moving, are classics, absolutely brilliant. Sounds different from anything else that Deep Purple ever did. It's kind of probably the best thing Tommy Bolin did. But Tommy Bolin fans might have something to say about that. But I think this is a great album. Stands alone in their catalogue. So that is number 12. Number 11 is... Where is it? Oh, there we go. Hang on. Bum, 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 bum. What's that doing there? Hang on a second. Yeah. Anyway, got the albums out of order. Come Taste the Band was number 12, and so number 11 is Ricochet by Tangerine Dream. Now, this was Tangerine Dream's third album on the Virgin label. It's mostly sourced from live recordings and kind of knitted together in a studio, and it sounds like a studio album. The sound effects, the mellotron, the atmospherics have kind of been replaced here by a very rhythmic sequencer kind of sound palette. So this thing's pulsating all the time. Part one is absolutely fantastic. Listened to this just the other day as well. Just so much more dynamic and exciting than their other albums, and the best thing they ever did, in my judgment. I kind of tuned out of Tangerine Dream a year or two after this. They never got any better than this album. So that's Ricochet by Tangerine Dream. So that's number 11. Number 10 is Joni Mitchell and the Hissing of Summer Lawns. I like this much better than Court and Spark, and that's why Court and Spark didn't appear in my 1974 video. This, I don't know what, it kind of reminds me of, maybe it's the title, the Summer Lawns, but it kind of reminds me of almost like the perfect album for a heat wave. It just has that kind of languid, really kind of polished feel. And because the jungle line, the famous jungle line, which very rhythmic, kind of leaps out the speakers and pushes you out, knocks you out of any kind of malaise or mood or relaxing mood. But the rest of it is great for the reasons that I've just mentioned. It's got the classic. It opens with the classic in France, The Kiss on Main Street. Edith and the Kingpin and Don't Interrupt the Sorrow, both classics as well. Title track is great. Shadows and Light, which has just got the keyboard wash and a cappella vocals over it. That's not really the same, is it? No, it just sings over it, but it's kind of nothing there other than behind her than the this keyboard wash. Wonderful, wonderful album. Yeah. So that's Hissing of Summer Lawns. Number 9 is something quite different, and this is Voyage of the Acolyte by Steve Hackett. Steve Hackett, guitarist in Genesis during their golden period. This is the time, this is the album, the first solo album by a member of Genesis. This is the album that made me realize that even though Peter Gabriel had left in the same year, because I saw them half a dozen gigs before the very end on the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour. He left in the early summer of 1975, and this came out later on in the year. And this is when I knew that Genesis were going to be absolutely fine. Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins appear. Phil Collins also sings, voice much softer than Peter Gabriel's, and not as kind of soulful as he became a kind of a pop icon. It's kind of a much softer vocal here, but this album has got all the dynamics of Genesis, all the melody as well. It's patchy like all Steve Hackett albums. He tries to put too many ideas in, needs a good editor, and it's probably quite telling that Genesis keyboard player Tony Banks didn't appear on this album, or wasn't invited to appear on this album, because they Hackett and Banks kind of were correcting each other, editing each other's work, and both fighting in the band for maybe the melody line, the big classic memorable melody line. And so maybe there's some competition going on in there. And I always felt that neither of these artists, Hackett or Banks, did a fantastic job in their solo career at producing real great albums. But when they were working together in Genesis, they were absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so this is Steve Hackett and The Voyage of the Acolyte. Right, that's number 9. Number 8 is 10cc and the original soundtrack. Art Rock. Nice cover. Probably by Hipgnosis. Is it by Hipgnosis? Yes, it is. Album cover by Hipgnosis. Great album, as I say. Art Rock. Kind of pop music, but sophisticated pop music. Very accessible, but very different. So there's nothing going on here where you think it's really, really bland. It's got kind of that little edge to it. Of course, it contains "I'm Not in Love," which has all those layered vocals on it, which is unique. It's very, very distinctive, and their biggest hit by a million miles. It also has the wonderful "Life as a Minestrone," and it opens with the 3-part "One Night in Paris," which is tour de force. It's fantastic. Sounds absolutely brilliant. Great album. So, 10cc. Right, that was number 8. Number 7, everyone's favorite gun-toting libertarian, Ted Nugent, and his self-titled album from 1975. Is this the first solo album he did? I think it might be the first solo album he did. I know that people's judgment is clouded by Ted Nugent's politics and his support for the NRA in America, but if you just take it on its musical terms, it's really, really distinctive. Apart from "Hey Baby" on side 1, which has kind of got a kind of fairly pedestrian blues number, the mood of the rest of the album is all about kind of precision and tone in his guitar. It's very clear sounding. There's no shredding going on here. It's kind of very, very controlled riffage and precision notes on the kind of solos on the tracks. And it's best exemplified by the opening track, Stranglehold, which in my judgment in rock music, it's possibly a top 10 track. It's long, it's about 8 minutes, I think it is, but it has some beautiful, sensitive and precise guitar. Sounds beautiful, as well as great climaxes as well. So yeah, That is a good album. If you can get past Ted's politics, it's worth hearing. Number 5 is another one from the Virgin record stable, and that is Ommadawn by Mike Oldfield. Oldfield's third album after Hergest Ridge. Hergest Ridge had that kind of pastoral feel. This has a very countrified feel. Both are much better than Tubular Bells, which is kind of all over the place and a classic of its type, of course. But this one has just flows absolutely beautiful. It has all the peaks and troughs, but great dynamic composition. But there's something about it just kind of hangs together so much more coherently than Tubular Bells does. And it's more dynamic than Hergest Ridge. He has layered vocals, like a vocal ensemble. Wouldn't exactly say it's a choir going on, which kind of, and particularly on part 1, which there's basically three tracks on this one really. But the last one is just a ballad at the end. But part 1 is the one to go for. So these layered vocals, these kind of choral style vocals. You also have these kind of Burundi type drums, just building to a climax, and then he has this screeching electric guitar that comes in at the end of side 1, part 1, which is just gets higher and higher. You know, like it's kind of orgasmic electric guitar, and it's the best thing he ever did. It is just thrilling. It's so exciting. Easily the best section of music he ever did. Part 1, Ommadawn. Number 4 is Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan. So this, I mean, I first got introduced to Bob Dylan really when I bought Planet Waves from the bargain bin, and I thought that was kind of a bit of a mess, really. And when I, read the reviews of it, that was kind of confirmed. That was the critics' view as well. But this album is it's arguably his most perfectly realized album. It's brilliant from start to finish. Fantastic lyrics. It's his breakup album. Fantastic lyrics, great melodies, really well-honed songs. And of course, we've had the bootleg series, which has got the alternative version of this one that was released some time ago to hear as well. So that is great. Many people will know that. It's the only kind of, is that Mo-Fi? Yeah, it's Mo-Fi. See, I'm slightly a bit of an audiophile, but not when it comes to buying records. So I've got this Mo-Fi version as well, which has got the gatefold, which is great. I bought this on a business trip to St. John's in Newfoundland. Came back with a bunch of records in my case. It definitely sounds better than the original. Really is good. So worth getting if you can get a hold of it. So that's number 4. Is that number 4? Was that number 5 rather? Number 5. Bob, number 5. Number 4 is Van der Graaf Generator and God Bluff. Van der Graaf Generator, dark prog music, very little, if any, guitar. The melody lines are dominated by sax and flute, underpinned by kind of Hammond organ, but all overshadowed by Peter Hamill, the singer, and his intellectual lyrics, if you like, and his kind of weird but compelling, often beautiful singing. This only has 4 tracks. This is their comeback album after they broke up when their equipment was stolen from the back of a van, or maybe the van was stolen on a tour to Italy. They were struggling to make any sort of money anyway, and they packed it in, but then came back about 4 years later, 3 to 4 years later, and then produced the first of a few albums before disappearing again. More of that on later videos. But this wonderful, wonderful album, very, very unique sounding. So that's my number 4. Top 3 albums of 1975. Queen, A Night of the Opera is at number 3. Was everywhere at the time. And you'll all remember, if you're of a certain vintage, that the video for Bohemian Rhapsody was kind of just blew everything away on Top of the Pops, and kind of paved the way almost certainly for the big video revolution. It was just wonderful. But the album sounds amazing, of course. Roy Thomas Baker is the producer. It's got a whole variety of styles. It's got hard rock, kind of baroque. It's vaudeville, kind of 1920s, kind of jazzy feeling places, as well as acoustic ballads and everything on piano and backed by guitar. But it hangs together so well. And I'm not a big fan of Queen. I did buy a few more albums, but never really a big fan. This was the peak of my interest in Queen, and it's a fabulous album. Number 2 could have been number 1, but it is Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. This, very cinematic, of course, as people often say, has the absolute milestones, the landmark, the unforgettable title track, Thunder Road, Jungle Land, absolute classics, fantastic songs. It's kind of let down in my judgment. It doesn't get the number 1 spot because of She's the One, which is, it's just too much for me. That Bo Diddley rhythm is just too predictable in my book. Backstreets goes on too long, and Night, the third track on side 1, seems a bit slight to me, but the rest of it is absolutely A-star. Fantastic album. And the best album of 1975, in my judgment, is Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. Easily the most perfectly realized Pink Floyd album in their catalogue. It has none of the dips in quality that Dark Side of the Moon has. You know, The Great Gig in the Sky goes on too long. Side 2, well, maybe On the Run goes a bit on too long as well on side 1. But side 2, Any Colour You Like, and so on. Anyway, so it's a bit, and I think Dark Side of the Moon suffers because its peaks are so high, you know, Time and Money, Breathe, Us and Them. But this album hasn't got a weak spot on it as far as I'm concerned. Flows absolutely beautiful. It's got all the affectionate lyrics around lost band member Syd Barrett, but also has some kind of biting wit as well, and critique of the music business. But this is a reissue from some years ago. But yeah, that's absolutely fantastic album. So that's my number 1 album of 1975. So yeah, that was the start of my period where I started to buy records in bulk. Basically because for the first time I was getting a weekly wage, and wasn't quite drinking alcohol yet, so there was nothing to spend my money on except records, and so that's what I did. So that's 1975. And I'll see you on the next video where I'll pick the best albums of 1976. See you next time. Bye-bye.